Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Mem Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Deborah Ashheim Weiss on the occasion of the 42nd yahrzeit of her beloved mother, Edith Ashheim. A day doesn't go by when I don't think of you, Mommy, and how amazed you would be to find me and my family living in Israel. Okay, with that, we'll get started today's daf. We're going to start with a Mishnah at the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. We saw last class. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shochek, right, we're in the middle of figuring out how we destroy idols. When we get into the country of Israel, we see idols, we are commanded to destroy them. So Rabbi Yossi says, Shochek v'zoreh l'roach o matir liyam. Crush it up into pieces and into little, like a powdery substance, and scatter it into the wind or throw it into the sea. Amrulo, the rabbi said, Af hu na'asa zevel. But then it's going to be used as fertilizer. Shenemar lo yidbak biyadcha mu'umam v'nacherev, and you're not allowed to benefit at all. Mentioned last class, it's part of this machloket of zev v'zeh, according to the Rashbam anyway. Two things that combined together, is that considered forbidden or not? Anyway, we'll put that issue aside. So now we start with the Gemara, and we're going to have, and today we have a study guide, and you'll see, I'll share my screen for a minute. You'll see in the study guide, we're going to have, each time we're going to have a proof of Rabbi Yossi, we're going to have a Braita, and in that Braita, we're going to have a whole discussion back and forth between Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis. Rabbi Yossi is going to keep quoting sources to try to prove his opinion, and the rabbis are going to respond. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi is going to basically try to prove to us there seems to be no problem of benefiting from the dust of, right, the dust that might fall from the crushed up idols falling a little bit on the ground. So Tanya, Amar lahem Rabbi Yossi, v'alo kvar ne'emar, it already says, ve'et chatotechem, asher asitem et ha'egel, lakachti, ve'esrof oto ba'esh, ve'ekot oto tachun hetev, ad asher dak la'afar, v'ashlich et afro el hanachal hayoreh b'nahar. Okay, so we have this pasuk, it's by Chet ha'egel, and it says, the chatatchem that you did from the egel, right, the sin that you did by the golden calf. Okay, I'm just looking for the source for the pasuk. It's in Sefer Dvarim. Okay, it's in the recounting of the story. Moshe says, I took the sin that you did for the egel. Esrof oto be'esh, I burned it in the fire. Ekot oto tachon hetev, and then I crushed it up into little pieces. Ad asher dak la'afar, until it was just like dust. And ashlich et afaro el hanachal hayoreh b'nahar. And I threw the dust, right, all what was left, into the stream that went down the mountain. Now, as opposed to throwing something in the yam, like in the sea, which goes into the depths of the sea, if you send something into the nachal, what happens? It washes up on the sides, and it basically fertilizes the land. So here comes Rabbi Yossi, and he says, look, this proves my point. To which Amrulo, the rabbi said to him, Misham ra'aya, this is your proof? Wait, but it says in Sefer Shemot, when it describes what happened, what was the purpose of Moshe crushing it up into little pieces? He scattered it specifically into the water, and he had the people drink the water. Lo nitkaven ela libadkan kisotot. What he really wanted to do was to have the water check them. Okay, there's a Gemara that talks about that the people of who sinned in Chet ha'egel died in 3 different ways. Some died by the sword of the Levites, some died in a plague, and others died by having this hydrokan, which was a stomach issue, and like a disease that happens with the explosion of the stomach, and this, or some sort of disease in the stomach or the insides, and this came from the drinking of the water. So the reason why Moshe crushed it up into little pieces was actually to put it into the water so that they could be checked, like the sota gets checked, and then if they were guilty, they would die. If not, they wouldn't. And therefore, it wasn't scattered like we thought before. And the way the rabbis would explain the original pasuk, Eshlichet afaro el hanachal hayoreh b'nahar, means take water from the nachal, put the little crushed up pieces into that water, and then have them drink it. Okay, so again, Rabbi Yossi tried to prove it from a verse, but came the rabbis back and said, no, the water was actually used for drinking. The pieces, the little pieces, the dust from the crushed up idols were actually used for drinking completely. You could say that Rabbi Yossi thought maybe some of it was used for drinking and some of it was poured into the Nachal, and thus trying to prove his own opinion. Okay, back to, we're going to have, as mentioned before, there's going to be 4 proofs, okay? 4 back and forths here, where Rabbi Yossi is going to say, Halok farne amal, and then the rabbis are going to retort. So, next one. Amar lahem Rabbi Yossi, V'halok farne amal, V'gam acha, em asa hamelech, asher hisiרה מגבירה, אשר עשתה לאשרה מפלצתה, וידק וישרוף בנחל קדרון. So Asa, the king, takes from his mother, had this, she made for the Asherah a mifletzet, and he crushed it up into pieces and burned it in the Nachal Kidron. Okay, so what do you see here? Again, it gets sent into the Nachal, which means it's going to fertilize, and we don't seem to be bothered by that. Amrulo, they said to him, Misham ra'aya, you think that's a proof? Nachal Kidron eino megadel tzmachim. Nothing grows on the sides of Nachal Kidron, and therefore there's no worry about it fertilizing anything. Vilo, the Gemara asks, really? Okay, difficulty on this answer of the rabbis. Really? Nothing grows in Nachal Kidron? Elu ve'elu. Okay, we're now talking about the blood from the chataot. Okay, we take the blood from the chataot that are done in the inner sanctuary and the chataot that are done on the outside altar. Okay, those are different types of chatat sacrifices. We take them together, and basically all of them, mitarvim ba'ama, there was a channel that took out all the blood that came from those sacrifices, right? Any extra blood that dripped down would go through this channel, v'yotzim l'nachal kidron, and it would go out to Nachal Kidron, and then they would collect it. When it got into the Nachal, they would collect the blood, v'nimkarim l'gananim l'zabel, and they would sell it to gananim, to gardeners, for fertilizer. Umoalim bahem. And there's a law of me'ilah, okay, meaning you're not allowed to benefit from them. Now, this is a little bit strange, because first of all, there's this concept that there's the dam of korbanot, the blood of korbanot, there's no laws of me'ilah. So the rabbis say, well, by rabbinic law, it's forbidden to do that. Okay, so that's number one problem. It's only rabbinic. There's no me'ilah on a Torah level. It's only rabbinic me'ilah, misuse of consecrated property. The other problem is, how could you sell it lizabel if there's me'ilah? So what they mean is, if you redeem it, then you can use it. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to take the sanctity of the blood, remove the sanctity, put it onto a coin, then the coin has the sanctity and the blood doesn't, and that's how the gananim, the gardeners, could use it. Anyway, the point being that Nachal Kidron isn't megadel tzmachim, but it says here you would sell it legananim lezabel. So it sounds like it would go out to Nachal Kidron and it would be used for fertilizing the stuff near Nachal Kidron. Now, how does this source actually prove that Nachal Kidron was used for fertilizing? Because it could be they took the blood and they brought it to other places, right? Just because it happened to be near Nachal Kidron doesn't mean that the gardeners used it to fertilize the soil near Nachal Kidron. So Tosfot raises this question and responds that this actually was the truth, though. There really was. And therefore, the Gemara kind of assumes that that's the case because that was the reality. So how does the Gemara respond to this? To which they answer, Makamot yesh bo. Yesh makom megadel tzmachim, yesh makom she'em megadel tzmachim. There's some parts near Nachal Kidron that do grow, and there's some parts that don't grow. Okay, where the soil grows things, some parts where it doesn't, and therefore don't raise the difficulty from this other source. That was talking about a certain area by Nachal Kidron, but our original source, right, that the rabbis were trying to prove, when the rabbis say Nachal Kidron, right, that they, in the time of Asa, when they poured it into Nachal Kidron, where they dumped the dust into Nachal Kidron, that was an area where there were no tzmachim, and therefore you can't prove it from there. Now we're just going to have an aside, which is my mifletzta. What's this mifletzet that she had? What is the meaning of that? What kind of god was this? Rabbi Yehuda dahava mafli leitzanuta. Dahava maflia leitzanuta. She would engage. Okay, well, we're going to explain what this means in a minute. Okay, so mifletzet usually means a monster, but here their understanding is a notrikon as maflaya leitzanuta. She would engage in actions with this idol, like clownery, okay, like inappropriate behavior. We're going to see right now. Kitutani Rav Yosef kimin zachrut astala v'haytaniv elet lo b'chol yom. Okay, it had a male, and it was a statue with the male private parts there, and she would actually engage in relations daily with this statue. Okay, back to our topic. Amar lahem Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi comes with his third proof. So in the time of Chizkiyahu, he does a reformation and he gets rid of all the idols. And in getting rid of all the idols, he gets rid of the Nachash Nechoshet that Moshe did. This was he used in the plague to save the people at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, and he crushes it up into pieces. Now, we're going to assume he crushed it up, right? And then again, you have the pieces around, and they could be used for fertilizer or something like that. And here it seems like wasn't a problem. Amrulo, Misham Ra'aya. Now the answer this time is going to be you can't prove it from there because it wasn't actually an idol that was forbidden to benefit from. Okay, once we can prove that, then we don't have an issue. Now, it's hard to say that because the people were actually worshiping the Nachash Nechoshet. In other words, Moshe had used it at the time as an act of God to save the people from the plague. Whoever looked at the Nachash Nechoshet would be saved. But later it became this piece of idol worship. So how are the rabbis going to prove this wasn't really used for idol worship or not halachically forbidden to benefit from? It really was used for idol worship, but it wasn't really asur b'hana'ah. How could you have such a thing? Well, they say Misham Ra'aya, Harei Womiyah, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Aseh lecha saraf. God tells Moshe, make yourself this serpent. Lecha, now why does it say make for yourself? Lecha mishalcha, it's going to be your own. Which means that it was Moshe's. It belonged to Moshe. It wasn't public property. Which means that it was passed down to Moshe's descendants. Which means that when other people turn this into an idol, it wasn't their own to turn into an idol. A person can't forbid something that they don't own. So if it was owned by Moshe's descendants, it wasn't actually, now it could be people worshipped it, but it wasn't actually considered an idol and therefore wasn't forbidden by Hana. You can't come into my house and turn something into an idol and then forbid it for me to benefit from. Of course not, it's mine. Really, you didn't even need to crush it up. The problem was that people were actually worshipping it. Because of that, he crushed it up. But it wasn't really forbidden to benefit from. Amar lahem, fourth and final proof that Rabbi Yossi is going to attempt. Okay, so the first thing we're going to say is, this is, David fights against the Plishtim, and then it says, they left their atzabehem, and vayisa'em. Now, yisa'em usually means he carried them. We're going to understand vayisa'em as, he scattered it, okay, crushed it up and scattered it all over. Okay, that's what David and his people did. Now, the first question we're going to have to explain is, how did you get from vayisa'um to scattered? Umay mashma dahai vayisa'em David lishna dizehu yahu. How do you know that that means it was scattered? Kidim etargim Rav Yosef, as Rav Yosef translated that passage. Tizreim veruach tiseim. Scatter them and the wind will carry them. But Yisrael is really the wind is going to carry them. So what it means is they were crushed up and then, right, David and his people crushed it up and then the wind scattered them. And then you see, Rav Yosef can prove his point, right? And Mitargaminan, so the pasuk says, right, there's Tizreim, one second. Right, this is actually, this is a different pasuk. This is a pasuk in Yeshayahu, which is Tizreim v'ruach tiseim, and the wind will carry it. And in Mitargaminan, and the Targum on that pasuk is Tazrinan v'ruach titaltalinan. Okay, which is scatter it, and the wind will carry it. So, and scatter it basically, because when the wind carries something, what does it do? It scatters it. So now, what they want to prove here is the word ruach tisaem, the wind will carry it. The word carry is actually translated here in this pasuk in Yeshayahu, a totally different pasuk, as titaltalina. It will be kind of scattered everywhere or carried everywhere. So now we're going to say, and therefore in our pasuk of Vayiseim David, Rabbi Yossi explains, is going to mean scattered. And that proves my point. It was scattered, the Avodah Zarah, and it was permitted. Amruleh, they say to him, the rabbis, Misham Ra'aya, you want to prove it from there? Harei Yomel, look at the parallel pasuk in Divrei HaYamim. This story comes up in Shmuel Bet, and it comes up also in Divrei HaYamim. Now, when you have parallel stories, sometimes the words are different. So the verses are identical, except instead of Vayise'em, it says Vayisarfu Ba'esh. It was burned. And now we're going to say, umidlo k'tiv vayisrafem vayisa'em, because it doesn't say to the two words together, it was burned and then carried, which then would mean it was burned, and once it was burned, it was ashes, and then the ashes were scattered. No, it must mean, shmamina vayisa'em mamash. They pick them up, and then they burn them. So what do you see? Yisa'em means pick up. It doesn't mean scattered. They pick them up and they burn them. That's not the same as scattering them. So, anyway, that's how the rabbis explain it. However, the Gemara asks, 1 second though, but there's a contradiction. One says they burn, one says they carried. How do you resolve that? Kid de Rav Huna. We're going to resolve it like Rav Huna said. De Rav Huna Rami. Huna threw these two psukim against each other. K'tiv hayomer David vayisarfum ba'esh. Uchtiv vayisa'em. Okay, brought the exact contradiction we're talking about. And then said, lo kashya. Kan kodem shaba itay agiti. Kan achar shaba itay agiti. One was before Ittai Giti came, and one was after. Ittai Giti was a friend of David's, but he was also not Jewish. Now, what did Ittai Giti do? He was a Gentile, so he was able to nullify the idols. So what happened was, first they found the idols, and they were supposed to burn them. But then Ittai Giti came along, and he canceled them from being idols, and then they actually carried them, and they took them, and they were able to use them because they were no longer forbidden. And then that's how the rabbis explain the pasuk, and then it has no proof whatsoever for Rabbi Yossi, according to that interpretation. Now, how do we know that Ittai Giti was involved in this kind of thing? Well, not from our pasuk, but from a different chapter in Shmuel Bet, where Ittai Giti comes in. I'm going to see right now. So they took off the crown from the head of the king of Ammon. Umishkala kikar zahav, and it weighed a whole kikar's worth of zahav. That's how heavy it was. And then they put it on David's head. Okay, so now we're going to see. I just want to read the whole pasuk. Umishkala kikar zahav ve'evan yikara v'tiyal rosh David u'shlal la'ir hutziar be'mod. Okay, and then they put it on David's head. Now, Amar Rav Nachman. So Mishari, how did they do this? Isurei ana'aninu. Okay, this crown of the king of Ammon, this is actually the crown of it was actually from sorry, I have to correct myself. It was a crown from the god of the king of Ammon, and it should be forbidden to benefit from. So they say, just 1 second, Ateret Malkam B'nei Ammon, right. Avodah Zarah Shelahem Malkom Shma. Okay, Rashi says, it was Ateret Malkam is the Atara of Malkam, which was their god. Okay, so now, and that they prove from Pesukim that Malkam was their god. So now they say it should be forbidden to benefit from. So they answer, Amar Rav Nachman, Ittai Giti ba'u bitla. Okay, and that's our proof. That's why we brought this, because Ittai Giti was the one who nullified it. So just like he nullified that, we're going to assume he nullified the previous stuff of the Plishtim. And that's why carrying actually means they carried it and they took it, and it wasn't Avodah Zarah that they had to crush up. And against Rabbi Yossi's proof. Now they're going to ask some questions about this. Wait a minute. How did David put on a crown that was so heavy that weighed a kikar of zahav? That's a lot of gold. Mishkala kikar zahav. How did he put it on his head? So Amar Rav Yud Amar Rav ra'oi lanu achal rosh David. Okay, one answer is, it was worthy of being on the head of David, but he didn't actually put it on his head. It was way too heavy. It's like you have crown jewels, but you never really wear them. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Amar, Evan sho'evet haytaba dahava la. He says there was a magnet in it. Okay, some people explain the magnet was hanging over the chair of David, and David would put it on, but it would hang and hover over his head because the magnet suspended it in the air. Rabbi Elazar Amar, Evan yikara haytaba sheshava kikar zahav. It just had this beautiful jewel in it that was worth a kikar of zahav, but not that it weighed a kikar of zahav. We thought it meant weight, but no, it meant it's worth a kikar of zahav. Okay, and those are different interpretations about how he could have worn this crown. Okay, now more about the crown. Zot haitali ki pikudecha natzarti. We're now quoting a pasuk from Tehillim, and we're going to say ki pikudecha natzarti is I kept your mitzvot, and zot haitali, this I had because of that. What's going to be this? The crown. My kamar, hachi kamar. So what does this pasuk mean? Well, it means bischar shepikudecha natzarti, because I kept your mitzvot. Zot haitali le'edut. This crown stood for me as edut, as proof that I am king. How did a crown stand as proof? Ma eduta. How did that work? Amar Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, shaitam anicha b'mkom tefillin v'holam to. he would put it where his tefillin went, and it actually fit. Okay, there's a whole discussion about how the place where the tefillin go is actually not the place where normally they would put the crown. And the point is he put it there, and it actually fit on his head, even though it's not so typical that a crown would actually fit like that, and it worked. But now they ask another question. How did David wear the crown where his tefillin go? Didn't he need to put tefillin there? Habaya nuchi tefillin. He needs to put his tefillin there. So how could he put the crown there? There's enough room in the head that you could put 2 sets of tefillin. It's actually a debate. First of all, some people say from here, this is how people learn that you can wear the tefillin of Rashi and the tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam at the same time. There are some people who do that kind of thing. The big question is, how do you wear 2? One on top of the other or one next to the other? And there's a big debate among the commentaries how he did that. Now we're going to read another pasuk. Vayotziu et ben hamelech v'yitnu alav et hanezel ve'et ha'edut. So now we're going to have another pasuk that talks about the crown. And we're talking here about, this is in the time after Achav, we have Yehu ben Nimshi destroys all the people of Achav. And with that, if you remember, he kills Achaziah, the son of Yoram, king of Yehuda, whose mother was Atalyah, who was the daughter of Achav. So he kills then Achaziah. He kills all of the people in the house, but there's one little baby who's the son, Yehoash. He's the son of Achaziah, and he gets saved by the Yehosheva, who's the sister of Achaziah, who happens to be married to the Kohen Gadol. And they hide him. Okay, they hide him, and then they take him out when he gets older. And when they take him out, this is the pasuk. Vayotziu, they take out Yoash ben Hamelech. Vayitnu alav et hanezer ve'et ha'edut. So what is this nezer and what is the edut? Nezer zo klila, that's the crown. Edut, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, edut hu lebeit David. This was proof for Beit David. Shekol ha'ro'eh l'malchut holamto. Whoever is supposed to be the king, it actually fits, and this goes back to what we saw about David. The crown magically fit on his head. Anyone who wears the crown and it fits, that's a sign that they're supposed to be king. And if you're not supposed to be wearing it, if the crown doesn't fit you, it's proof you're not supposed to be the king. Another story of someone with the crown, and the crown in this case is actually not going to fit, proving this person shouldn't have been the king. And this is when David is ready to die. If you remember, Adoniah tries to become the king, even though Shlomo was supposed to be the king. Adoniah ben Chagit ben Naseh lomar aniyam loch, he was saying, I'm going to be king. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav shemitnaseh lahomo v'lo holamto. So what does it mean? He was mitnaseh. He tried to wear the crown, but it didn't fit on his head. Vayaslo, the continuation, we're just going to finish that pasuk. The continuation of that pasuk, Vayaslo rechavu parashim v'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav. My ributai, what was so unique about the 50 people that were ratzim lefanav, as if there was something unique about them? Well, kulam netulei tchol v'chalkukei kapot raglayim hayu. Okay, nowadays we use steroids to get people to be fast runners. In those days they had other tactics. So they would take out their spleens. That did weigh them down less. They were able to run quicker. And they would scrape off part of the flesh in their feet. And that would allow them somehow to run faster, something along those lines. Okay, so that was all on the side about the crown and the crown fitting. Okay, but how did we get to that? I'm just going to review quickly this side of the daf. So we started with the proof of all these 4 attempts that Rabbi Yossi makes to try to say, oh, look, you could crush up the Avodah Zarah into little powdery pieces, powdery substance and scatter it. Because look, this is what they did in all these different times in history. Okay, and that was what we saw with these 4 proofs. But each time the rabbis had to retort and explain, no, you didn't really understand it properly. Okay, and then each time they reject, and that's what you can go back and look at the chart to review. Okay, now we're going to go to Amud Bet, a new section. Now we get to a Mishnah, new Mishnah. Sha'al Proklus ben Plosfus. Okay, some people say Plosfus from philosopher, and that he was actually a philosopher, not the son of Philosophus, but maybe he was a philosopher, or maybe Philosophus was the philosopher, and this is the son of. Anyway, Proklus, the son of Plosfus, asked Sha'al et Rabban Gamliel ba'Akko. He asked Rabban Gamliel, who was in Akko, a question. Shaya rochetz b'merchat shel Aphrodite. Now, Rabban Gamliel was in the bathhouse of Aphrodite. Aphrodite is a goddess. Amarle. So while Proklus sees Rabban Gamliel in the bathhouse of Aphrodite, he says, "You're not allowed to benefit at all from any of the Avodah Zarah. What are you doing in this bathhouse?" Amarlo, Now, Rabban Gamliel has a number of responses, and I organized this also in the chart into numbers. Okay, we have really 3 responses, although some people think 1 and 2 is kind of one and the same. But I numbered them and I underlined the important lines because later we're going to go back to those underlined lines in this section at the bottom. There's 4 sections. 2 relate to the same sentence, and the other ones relate to the other 2. Amar lo, ein meshivim b'merchatz. Okay, so what does Rabban Gamliel answer him? I'm sorry, but I can't answer you divrei Torah in the Beit HaMerchatz. Not an appropriate place to talk about Torah. Can't answer your question. Uchishi yatzan, when he left the bathhouse, Amar lo, he starts to give him his answers. So the first answer he gives him is just, I'm not answering you because I'm in the bathhouse and I can't talk to you Torah. But when he left the bathhouse, he said, listen, ani lo bati b'gvula, hi ba b'gvuli. Number 1, I didn't go to Aphrodite. Aphrodite came to here, meaning the bathhouse existed without Aphrodite. Then they brought Aphrodite into the bathhouse. Number 2, ein omrim nase merchatz noy la'Aphrodite, ela omrim nase Aphrodite noy la'merchatz. Now this is kind of like the previous one, because what it's saying here is, we didn't say, let's make a bathhouse, a beautiful bathhouse, to serve Aphrodite. No, we said, bring Aphrodite here into the bathhouse so that it will decorate the bathhouse. And it's just decorative. It's not an idol. Davar acher, a different answer. Someone can give you all the money in the world, but you're not going to go into a place of idol worship naked. In other words, someone can pay you, you're still not going to go into an idol worship place naked, or a Baal Keri, or if you had a seminal mission, or mashtim b'faneh, or you wouldn't urinate in front of her. But look at where Aphrodite stands. Zo omedet al pi abiv. This is right by the sewage pipe. V'kol ha'am mashtinim lefaneh, and everybody urinates right in front of her. And lo ne'emar ela Elohehem. The pasuk says they're gods. Et shenoheg ba mishum Eloha asur. If they treat it like a god, it's forbidden. Et she'eno noheg ba mishum Eloha mutal. But if it's not treated like a god, then it's permitted. So the first question the Gemara asks, okay, not yet our chart. The first question the Gemara asks is Heichi Avid Hachi. How did Rabban Gamliel answer his question and say, while he was still in the bathhouse, I can't answer, I'm not allowed to talk divrei Torah in the bathhouse. That in and of itself is Torah. He's basically teaching him a halacha. So Rabbi Baruch Hanan Rabbi Yochanan b'chol makom mutar l'arher chutz mi beit hamerchatz u'beit hakisei. So we have this statement of Rabbi Baruch Hanan in the name of Rabbi Yochanan who says you can think thoughts anywhere you want, but not in the beit hamerchatz and not in the beit hakisei, not in the bathroom and not in the bathhouse. So how is he thinking thoughts of Torah? And obviously if he answered him, he was thinking, am I allowed to answer him? No, I'm not allowed to answer him. And therefore, when he answered him, it was actually, even worse than just thinking divrei Torah. Well, maybe it's because he answered him not in Hebrew language, but a secular language. Right? Presumably, Proklus didn't speak Hebrew. Well, that's not going to help you because Hamar Abaye, Dvarim shel chol mutar la'amram b'lashon kodesh. Dvarim shel kodesh asur la'amram b'lashon chol. Okay, you're allowed to say things that are secular in the language of kodesh, but you can't say Dvarim shel kodesh in the language of chol. So it can't be that he said it in the language of chol. Not possible. So how do we answer? How do we resolve this problem? Tana k'sheyatza amar lo. Now notice in the Mishnah it said, and when he left, he gave them all He gave him all the real answers. But now they're saying, no, put the word kasheyatza even before that. When he left, he said, I can't answer you in the Beit HaMerchatz. In the Beit HaMerchatz, he obviously just ignored him. And only when he came out did he start to answer him. Otherwise, that wouldn't work. Okay, just one second. Right, I want to go back for a minute to what Abaye said. So what we mean here is that if you're doing business, for example, you can speak business. What we mean, mutar la'omram, b'lashon kodesh means you can say them even in a bathroom or discussing place in Hebrew because it's business dealings. It's not sanctified stuff. But sanctified things like halacha, you can't speak in the bathroom even b'lashon chol. In other words, it doesn't matter what language you speak. It's all Torah. It doesn't matter whether it's Hebrew, English, Spanish, French, whatever language you're speaking. Now we get to the next chart on the sheet. Amar Rabbi Chama bar Yosef Rebbe Amar Rabbi Yoshaya. And this will take us to the end of the daf. Tshuva genuva shivo Rabban Gamliel lo toek mo. So Rabbi Chama bar Yosef says in the name of Rabbi Yoshaya, and you're going to see in a minute he's going to disagree with Rabbi Yoshaya, but I'll pull up the sheet again. He says, this was a fake answer that Rabban Gamliel gave. Okay? But then he says, Va'ani omer, eina genuva, but I say it wasn't a fake answer. In other words, what does it mean? It's a stolen answer, meaning what you call genevat dad. He tricked him into believing it was a real answer, but it wasn't a real answer. That's what Rabbi Yoshaya said, but I think it was a real answer. And now we're going to have 4 possibilities about what the fake answer was and why Rabbi Chama bar Yosef thinks it actually was a real answer. Okay, the first one is Rabbi Yoshaya said it. The next one we'll see is Abai. The next one Rav Shimi bar Chia. And the final one is Rabba bar Ula. So let's go through. So my genufte, what was the stolen answer? Dika'amar lo zo omedet al pi abiv. Okay, now we're back to number 3. Okay, this is the third. This is why I put it all up here, 1, 2, and 3, so we can refer back. She's standing by the sewer pipe. Okay, and they're all urinating before her. So now the question is, so what if they're all urinating before her? That still could be Avodah Zarah. If you remember, there's Baal Pa'or, where people defecate in front of Baal Pa'or, and it's not nullified. And Rabban Gamliel's point was, if they're urinating in front of her, they're clearly saying this is not a god, and therefore there's no problem for me to be here. So that's what Rabbi Yoshaya said. Right? But then, what does he answer back? But I say it's not a stolen answer. Why? Only Baal Pa'or. If you defecate in front of it, it's not going to be batel. But if you take Aphrodite, who is not worshipped in that manner, right? That's because that's the way people worship Baal Pa'or. But this one's not supposed to be worshipped in that manner. So if you were to urinate in front of her, obviously you're saying we don't believe this is an idol. Amar Abai. Next answer. Gunufte mehacha. This is where Rabban Gamliel was tricking him. Ani lo bati bigvula v'hi ba'a bigvuli. Okay, I didn't come into her territory, she came into my territory. First the bathhouse existed, then came Aphrodite. So, what's the issue? So what if Aphrodite came in later? Why does that make any difference? V'hatnan, it says in the Mishnah. Avodah kochavim sheyesh la merchatz, ogina, nehenim mehem shelo b'tova, ve'ein nehenim behem b'tova. Okay, what does this mean? If you have an Avodah Zarah in a merchatz or a gina, and you want to benefit from it, so you can use that bathhouse as long as the person who's in charge of it, the idol worshiper, the pagan, is not getting any benefit from it. Okay, if they're not benefiting from it, like you're not doing a favor for them because you use their bathhouse, then it's fine. You can use it. But this is not the important part, but you can't benefit from it if you're giving them something, like you'll give them a favor back because they let you use their bathhouse, because then you're actually helping benefit an Ovei Kochavim. But what do you see here? You can actually benefit from it. If there's a bathhouse there, right, and it's an idol worshiper's bathhouse, it's totally permitted. So it shouldn't matter whether even if Rabban Gamliel went into the area where there was an Aphrodite, he still theoretically would be able to use it. But they say no. Why not? V'ani omer ena genuva, but comes Rav Chama bar Yosef and says no. This is not a fake answer. It was a real answer because shelo b'tovat Rabban Gamliel ki b'tovat achirim dami. Because anytime Rabban Gamliel uses it, it's always going to be b'tova. It's always going to be a favor to the person who whose bathhouse it is, because Rabban Gamliel was a prominent person. If he used that bathhouse, everyone would use that bathhouse, and that's obviously going to benefit the bathhouse owner, and therefore it is considered always b'tova, and therefore he really couldn't benefit. So if Rabban Gamliel had come into a bathhouse where Aphrodite was there first, as opposed to Aphrodite coming into the bathhouse after the bathhouse already existed, then actually it would have been forbidden. Okay, but Abai tried to claim maybe it wasn't, but it was. Rav Shimi bar Chia amal, genufte mehacha. This is where Rabban Gamliel was tricking. Okay, was really not telling the truth. As we saw before, that same line is the first one. Now we're going to come at it from a different angle. It says in a Mishnah, Uraka b'faneh, if you spit in his face, Hishtim b'faneh, you urinate in his face, Girirav zarak ba'etatzoah, or threw feces at it, Harezo ena b'telana. This is even if a Gentile does this. If a Gentile does this to the idol, it's not nullified. So therefore, you can't say that they were mavatal, they nullified Aphrodite because they were urinating on her. It says here, that wouldn't nullify it. So that's where Rabban Gamliel was really not telling a full truth. But Rav Chama Bar Yosef comes and says, no, Ani Omer Eina Genuva. This is not a false answer because Hatam Lefishata Hurata Chale Bahad Mafayisla. When it says in that Mishnah, if you spit on it, urinate on it, that's just a momentary thing that the owner got angry at the idol for some reason, but then comes back to the idol. Aval hacha, here, kol shata b'shata b'zulzulakaima, but here they're always urinating on her. This isn't like a one-time thing, a one-off, and then they go back to worshiping her. No, she's right in the spot where everybody urinates all the time. So that really would nullify the Avodah Zarah. Rabba bar Ulamar, the last one. Gnuv temehacha, de ka'amale, ein omrim na'aseh merchatz noel Aphrodite, ela na'aseh Aphrodite noel merchatz. Okay, again, we don't say that we're going to make the merchatz for Aphrodite. No, it was more that Aphrodite came to make the merchatz look beautiful, okay, which means it wasn't for idol worship. But wait, just because you said we're going to make the merchatz nice for by adding Aphrodite here, why would that be a problem? If we said we're going to make a merchatz for Aphrodite, okay, now we did, right? He said we didn't say na'aseh merchatz noel Aphrodite. But what? If you had said that, my have it would have been forbidden? It wouldn't have been. In other words, if you had said, we're going to make this merchatz for Aphrodite, that still wouldn't turn into Avodah Zarah because ha'omel by v'hatanya, it says in a Braita. Now that means basically what Rabban Gamliel is saying, this is going to be the critical part here. Just by saying that we're going to make this merchatz beautiful for Aphrodite, that would be like in our terminology of consecrating something for the temple. That would be designating it for an idol worship, and that would already make it forbidden. But actually, that's not forbidden because it says Ha'omer ba'etzel avodat kochavim. There's actually no concept of hekdesh by Avodah Zarah. So if you say this house is for avodat kochavim, this cup koszel avodat kochavim lo amar klum she'ein hekdesh avodat kochavim, until it's actually worshipped, like they sacrifice something to it, not considered an idol. Now, comes Rav Chama Bar Yosef. It says Va'ani Omer Eina genuva. Nihidi itzure lo mitzare mnoy mi'aika. Now, while we're going to say, okay, it's not actually forbidden b'hana'ah, but it's still, that's doing something for an idol, and it wouldn't be appropriate for Rabban Gamliel to be going to a bathhouse like that. So he was actually telling the truth. Okay, so what we did in this section was we saw this question, the Proclus ben Flosfus, asked Rabban Gamliel, and number one, we dealt with his response. How could he have said, I don't answer in the bathhouse, right? Which we had to resolve. And then the three things he said, of those three things, we have four possible problems with, seeming that maybe they're not actually accurate what he said, and that he really just gave an answer without any real basis. But in the end, Rabbi Chama Bar Yosef proves that no, actually these all had good, solid basis, and Rabban Gamliel was actually giving a solid answer. By the way, we've had conversations with Gentiles before where sometimes they give these answers that are just to kind of push them off. They're not actually the real answers. So it's not crazy to think that Rabban Gamliel actually didn't tell them the full answer, but Rav Chama basically provides a basis of support for this. And with that, we're going to finish today's daf, and wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.